We get going. And we got Gussie on the line.
Okay. We should be live on the net.
Okay.
And Scotty, can you hear us okay? Okay. I've got confirmation that they can hear us.
Okay.
I don't know if Gussie's away from her desk or not.
She might be muted. Looks like it's muted up there, maybe. Oh, okay. Bill, if you think everybody's on board, let's call the meeting order and welcome everybody. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, either here in person here in Richmond or on the line. I think, as I mentioned in a note to everybody, actually a week or so ago, we had a lot of open items actually from our last meeting, and we're going to work, I think, with scheduling and otherwise to try to be sure that we don't have quite so many that carry over. But today, again, obviously, some of these are things we want to sort of talk about that ultimately require approval. Some of these are things that we'll sort of want to do as an update. And we are in the process, I think, Bill, of scheduling a full board call, aren't we? So there will be an opportunity for the full board to be involved in this discussion. But on the advice of several of you, I want to be sure we're using the executive committee wisely to sort of as a sounding board on some things, and some that's the purpose of today. As you know, with General Delmony's passing, we have a vacancy on the board, and both on the board as well as this committee for a non-alumni. The governor's office had announced, as I think all of you have now seen a day or so ago, the appointment of Kate Todd. We look forward to reaching out to Kate and getting her involved in the process. Yeah, I think
and I have been in touch with her.
Let's go, and so we'll continue that process. So again, that's one new addition. The other thing, we've asked Conrad Garcia as a non-alum. Everyone knows, I think, Conrad and the work he's done on the board and the committees to join us today for the executive committee. And Conrad, thanks for making time to visit with us here today. Before we jump into the items on the agenda, which there are many, any further feedback, any discussion that we should have from anyone? General, anything you want to say before we, as a general matter, before we jump into things?
No. Good.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'd like to commend Bill for the very thorough minutes. I thought they were well written.
Absolutely. Good.
Appreciate it.
I think that's a good prompt, Teddy, because actually the first item on the agenda then is the approval of the minutes. So thank you very much for that. But as Teddy mentioned, the minutes are in the materials. Got a motion to approve?
So moved.
Good. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Any all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And they stand approved. Thank you very much. So again, we'll move now into some of the
comment on the great victory over the Citadel.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
The shaker back there.
I thought you were supposed to carry it around like the Stanley Cup with you everywhere you go, actually. So I was hoping it was going to be sitting here in the center of the table. Thank you for mentioning that.
It's been making its way around post. So for Parents Weekend, I think it was up in Lejeune Hall, and then it made its way down to Furby Lounge before the football game. When we played both Sanford, and then Wofford. So I'm sorry, Sanford and Tennessee Chattanooga. So it's making its way around post. Unfortunately, I suspect that if I brought it here, then I'd have to have a police escort or something like that.
Hugh, thanks for raising it though, because that's so important. It's great to see it in its appropriate hands. So with that, so maybe I'll turn things to you to start walking us through the open items.
Sure. Welcome, Mr. President. Welcome, XCOM members to this executive committee meeting. We have a number of topics that really are intended to pick up on some of the unfinished business from the September board meeting, with the hopes that we will get to closure on some items. I suspect will allow for a pretty healthy discussion, but there certainly are some items that we want to acknowledge, have the discussion, and get a decision by the board. And I think in the likeliest term, that decision will be that we're going to be teeing things up for the full board here in the coming weeks, because I think at least in the discussion with Mr. Watson, that some of these issues he wants them brought before the full board. So we're going to endeavor to do that. For the open session, we have 3 topics. that we want to tee up. We've got on the line respective subject matter experts and people to do the briefings. I'll be adding in my views in terms of the guidance that I've given them and the work that's been done. But I want to make sure that they can go through the various different topics with the thoroughness that they require, and then make a determination on where we go with the strategic plan, the transgender policy and procedures, and how we arrived at where we are right now on that particular topic. And then an update for you on the athletic budget of the 3 topics that we intend to cover in the open session. And I'm not sure, I believe you have at least one topic that you intend to cover in the open session, perhaps, or is that going to be closed?
I think it's closed session, yeah.
Okay, that'd be closed session. So we can start off with the first topic of the strategic plan. I've got Lee Rakes on the line, Dallas Clark in the room. Both Lee and Dallas led the effort that not only included the drafting of the document, but the entire process. And we briefed the board before on kind of the process that we went through in order to come up with the strategic plan. I will tell you that based on the feedback that I got from the September board meeting and the input that we got from board members after that, I'm very pleased with the document. I think the document does a couple of things. Number one, I think it solidifies some of the fundamentals about the Institute and reinforces those things that are important about VMI that have long existed and have long been important to how we produce young men and women of character. And so we are reinforcing those things when it comes to the mission, the vision, and the values of the Institute, and stating that going forward, we don't intend to change those things. But I also believe that because we are producing young men and women who have to operate differently in a different environment, have to consider certain things in a different environment here in the 21st century, that there are some things that we are going to have to take on. Some of them are innovative approaches to education, meaning that a lot of the good things that we do, we can do them in a different way, or we can do them better in a different way. And then a couple of bold initiatives that certainly for VMI, I call them bold initiatives, which are intended to help us get after some of the challenges that I've expressed, and I've heard the entire board, the various different members of the board express when it comes to college affordability, making sure that the quality of the education continues to move forward for our students, and that we're continuing to produce young men and women of high character who want to serve the country, they want to serve their communities, and they want to serve their families. And so I'm going to have Lee go through the slides that were posted for you all to review. Those slides are intended to help us briskly go through the comments that were provided at the last board meeting, and then the changes that were made in response to those comments, and then allow you all to comment on them as they're written right now. So with that, I'm going to turn to Lee and ask Lee to go ahead and start the brief and to begin to talk to the XCOM members about the changes to the strategy as they exist right now and where we are.
If I can just maybe make an opening comment too, I hope the other board members felt this kind of before and after sort of view actually helped a little bit actually, because so for all of us to read through the whole thing again, try to pick the kernels out from things that changed, I think it's pretty laborious. Sure. So thank you for doing it this way. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to highlight that too. The way it was set out with the suggestions for changes was very, very helpful, because then we could follow in and see what you did to meet those suggested changes. So very nicely laid out.
Good, Lee.
Board members, superintendent, sir, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to walk you very briefly through this. I know you have a packed agenda, and I won't spend any more time than is absolutely necessary to get through the nature of the changes that have been made. And as already has been discussed, we laid this out in such a way, in the way that I'm going to go through the brief.
I don't know how you want to go through these. maybe some,
Yeah, I think, I thought maybe we were gonna have Lee go maybe a bit page by page turn, if that's okay, Teddy, I think.
yeah, it's fine. I think you can assume that we've
Yeah,
we've
absolutely.
all read
We've all
them,
read it, absolutely.
and not
No, I think that's a good.
feel obligated to
Exactly.
go word for word through
Yes,
these.
thank
'Cause
you, yeah.
We do. have a
Sir,
heavy
it's a
agenda.
great pleasure to have you say that. So
What's
thank you very
the-
much. I won't spend, I'll do the highlights and we'll go through it very, very briefly.
While Bill is trying to get Lee on voice, Dallas, you want to pick up and just kind of go through? And again,
Let's just be sure Gussie's still on, if I may. Gussie, if you're on, can you please acknowledge, just
Acknowledged.
maybe everybody's.
Can you all hear me?
She just acknowledged by going off of mute, but we still can't hear. But
Yeah,
I think
guys,
that's a
can you hear me?
sign that we can hear.
Yeah.
yeah, she can hear us.
She can hear
If you
us.
can hear us, Gussie, mute yourself again. We'll know that you're.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, her microphone is moving up and down.
Projection in here is that.
Just.
Yeah, please, yeah, go ahead, Dallas. Good, because I think as Teddy said, we've all read this and,
Okay, so I don't know if we want to try and go page turn it or if you want to brief them by exception of specific areas, but I'm just going to pick up right here on the emphasize controlling costs and operational. Well, I guess maybe where the whole briefing starts is just the 5 big areas.
Right.
So everybody's aware of those. Just getting into the specific comments. There was a comment about the superintendent's letter on page 2, and you can see there the narrative, which was the suggestion to emphasize controlling costs and operational excellence and efficiency. And so you can see we really retooled one of the paragraphs to expand that and specifically captured that. It would be helpful if I read these or just.
no, I think maybe just pause on those, maybe just any intro you want to make and
I think
any,
that's the proper
yeah,
way to tee it up.
yeah, good. So again, unless there's comments more specific about those, maybe we'll just move on through this.
Okay, the next one was in one of the initiatives on recruit top cadets and boost success with that particular objective. The suggestion was, again, emphasizing controlling costs and operational excellence and efficiency. And so we ended up adding the 4th measure. There were 3, we had 4 strategies. We had that 4th strategy to be exceptional in our fundraising and operational excellence efforts with particular emphasis on controlling the cost of education to get these 4 efforts and sort of conclusion. So
Maybe one more comment before we go any further. Gussie, if you have any comments, I guess you're gonna have to email them to us until we get the microphone working.
okay, try now, Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can I use the chat?
Got you now, I guess. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We're good.
Good. We're good to go. All right.
Okay, so that was the second suggestion, and without any other comment, then I'll move to the next one.
Okay.
So the following slide, the suggestion illuminate what VMI will look like in 2039. Emphasize the fundamental elements of the VMI experience. I think this is overall the generalized comment. Well, where are we going? What we look like when we get there? And so we took that vision guiding process in page 4 and just opened that up and expanded those sections and tried to emphasize getting back to some of these 4 immutables of VMI's operations and pick those pieces up, getting back and explaining the honor system, class system, regional system, and so forth.
The only substantive comment I have in this whole in the whole strategic plan, other than I think it's great, is on this page, the 75% target serving their country in some capacity. I'm glad we've included other state and federal agencies. I think we all have agreed that is a good thing to do and a focus area for us. I question the 75% though. on a lot of levels. First of all, Bill was nice enough to provide me with 30 years of data, 91 through 2020 classes. And in those 30 years, we've had 4 years where we've had over 50% commission. Now, the first decade of that was not long after mandatory commissioning ended. But if you look at the last 10 years, and this does include, we might be missing a class or two of recent grads.
Yeah, I think it stopped in 22.
The data provided stopped in 20, so we're missing
We're missing 3 classes, but if you take 2011 to 2020, we exceeded 50% 2 of those 10 years. And the average over that 10-year period was 49%.
Does that capture CIA, DEA?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, this is commission. So add something to that and add a little more maybe if you include broader service to the state. But that's a long way from 75. So the goal should be achievable and the goal should drive behaviors. And if we're truly trying to get to 75, then that means we change admissions, who we bring in. I'm not sure 75% is consistent with citizen soldier element of VMI. And I know that in the prior vision 2039, the target was 70%. We never hit that. We never came close. And General P, probably halfway into his time, recognized that that was the wrong target. He just didn't want to change the document. But I think this 75% is too high for our mission and unachievable. And we should have a more reasonable target. And maybe it's a lower number that we say a minimum or at least X%.
Sure. Okay. And so I'll tell you a couple things. Number one, Teddy, it is intended to be a goal. And in the planning guidance document, as I recall, the planning guidance document, and as I articulated it, we acknowledged the fact that we were where we are, somewhere around 50 to 55%, that we were a top 5 commissioning source. So we took full credit for being a top 5 commissioning source, top 2 when it comes to the Army. And this is the planning guidance. And so that was given. And so we took credit for that. And then the idea was that to kind of remain consistent with the goal that was in Vision 2039, and I'm not even sure if it wasn't a target, but be that as it may, whatever it was described as, to remain consistent with that. So probably to your point, to say something more along the lines of, number one, remain a top 5 commissioning source, right? We absolutely want to do that. But when you incorporate these other areas of service and the definition of service, and then we build around that the way to capture the metrics associated with that, we could get closer to the goal. So certainly we can look at, and I don't know that 75% is too high a goal or not. Now, if we're going to hold ourselves to it, it may very well be. If we're going to hold ourselves to it and say every time we don't reach 75 as a goal, then we've fallen short. I agree with you. But I just want to say that to kind of give the context and the background of how we evolved from the planning guidance to the language that exists right now. But we can tweak it. We can reword it in such a way where it talks more about the 55% as a remaining a top commissioning source, top 5 commissioning source across the nation. We can word it in that way, and then describe 70 or 75 or whatever it is more as a goal oriented if necessary.
What if you simply said instead of with at least 75%, if you said with a goal of between 50 and 75%, serving their country in some capacity?
Sure.
That sounds good.
I agree with you.
I like that, Hugh. I like what you're saying too about remaining the top 5.
Sure.
That's pretty impactful, and that recognizes that the DoD demands are going to ebb and flow.
Sure, absolutely.
So I like the combination of those two.
Good, we're good with that?
So, oh, absolutely, we can fix that. Okay.
Hey, this is Gussie. I'm sorry, I cut out a little bit. I didn't hear everyone's comments. But I actually don't know that we need a percentage. I'm not averse to saying, you know, having a range there. And I would also suggest maybe instead of having state and federal agencies, we just have something about, you know, with a goal toward our graduates being, you know, involved in public service or something like that. You know, there are other ways one can be of service other than state and federal agencies, like, for example, tribal governments, but I don't think we need to list them all out. I'm just wondering if maybe a focus toward public service minded individuals. And I can maybe send an email with some suggested language.
Sure. I guess my only point, Gussie, is that, you know, we specifically, and we've always called out specifically U.S. Armed Forces service. And the difference that we're articulating now is that it includes more than U.S. Armed Forces service. So are you suggesting that we just take it all out, or are you just saying remain with the U.S. Armed Forces service, but take the other pieces out? Because I would tell you that as we were doing the drafts, okay, so as we were doing the drafts and as we were socializing it with folks, oftentimes the comment would be about, you don't have certain things in there that would really clarify that the difference is that we're, I mean, we were very specific at one point to even say FBI, CIA, and DEA, but then we changed it to federal and state agencies. And so a lot of the feedback that we got prior to this meeting was that the difference we were articulating was in addition to armed forces service.
And Gussie, note, it already says serving their country in some capacity, especially within U.S. Armed Forces. So I mean, I think
You're right.
I think public service, and public service is so broad. I mean, any government employee would qualify. So I kind of like the way it's drafted there.
Okay, good. There, Dallas, yep.
So the next was discuss how we accomplish the values of honor and resilience.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, and improve the language used to describe excellence. And so you can see here what we did is we took the 3 values of honor, excellence, and resilience, left what we added some additional language to emphasize those particular points under each of those 3 specific values. Any comments on those?
Yeah, that's good.
Really good.
The next comment was to add an action quote. This was really a banner on a side of one page that was just a piece of real estate that was just looking for a quote. And so that's been integrated in there on page 7 in the sidebar. Any comments on the action?
This came from Nancy, and I think Lee wrote the quote. We wrote the quote, and I think Lee went back to her and said, just to confirm that this was what her input centered on, and she was okay with it.
Correct.
Correct?
That's correct.
Nancy Phillips.
Good, okay.
Okay, next one, the suggestion was blend NCAA athletics with other leader development opportunities and a streamlined description of products. And so just under that, prepare exceptional leaders objective on page 8, you can see where we just added the opportunities for cadets to hone their leadership skills are many and varied, and just trying to articulate the expanded nature in which that can happen. Examples include, and then we provide some examples to open that aperture and play that a little bit. There was a secondary comment about in that lower paragraph, and captains of industry and civil rights martyr, to pull out the civil rights martyr piece of it. We captured Daniel's in other sections. It felt like that was adequate and didn't need to play the language with the civil rights martyr. Any comments on that slide? Okay, next slide is the suggestion was revise the graduate school reference. Obviously, this was something we've spent a fair amount of time on. This is under prepare exceptional leaders, objective 5. Explore the value added opportunity of expanding the Institute's exceptional leadership training model and reputation in new and innovative ways. And then you see some other modifications. The second paragraph, let me just pick up that second sentence. Thus, we need to determine if expansion into areas like undergraduate research and micro-credentials make sense, and if so, how exactly it should be undertaken. And then finally, paragraph is really just starting to leverage existing initiatives such as the fee endowment, provide yet explored opportunities to inspire faculty growth with BMI graduates. Offering a graduate program at BMI could be a catalyst to achieve this, and more expeditiously, maintaining and preserving the Institute's mission, culture, and traditions will be top priorities in this value added exploration.
What are micro credentials?
Micro credentials would be, you have a major and then you have minors. And there may be some other micro credential things that could be, call it a
IT certification.
Certification.
There's a concentration, but it's actually a piece of paper that goes with it.
Okay.
So,
Again, from my perspective, the key was that in addition to the first paragraph, expanding the Institute's exceptional leadership training model, et cetera, because that's the whole focus. That we've got something unique, we've got some special sauce, and how do we find ways, if possible, to expand that?
And I guess it walks back an expectation of moving into a graduate program. It gives latitude to consider that, but it kind of walks back that as an expectation.
Sure. Yeah, and as we've talked all along, the approach, again, the idea of micro-credentialing might be one aspect of it, kind of early testing, pilot testing. And then if that proves successful, continuing education, or you might be able to do micro-credentialing and continuing education program with kind of an expansion of the offerings that take place built around leadership, coming out of the Center for Leadership and Ethics. And then we would do a very, very thorough analysis where we would bring in a consultant to kind of look at the marketplace and actually look at the business case if we were going to pursue anything along the lines of a graduate program. And I believe in each step of the way, it certainly would offer us an opportunity to come back to the board to let you know what that analysis says, what the proof of principles say about credentialing or continuing education.
or something like those Microsoft certifications would be the micro-credential techniques like that.
Okay.
There's some of that ongoing, but this will be far more proactive and aggressive effort than any bolster their overall academic experience.
Gussie, I know you're chiming in as we go.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
have a question about expanding into areas like undergraduate research. I thought we already did a significant amount of undergraduate research. I guess I'm not sure what we're saying there.
So we do, numerically speaking, we have one significant contract, and that is in the Computer Information Science Department with a partnership with the senior military colleges, where we get about $3 million. I think on par, we probably do about $5 million or somewhere just shy of that in terms of undergraduate research that generates revenue, am I right? And so the idea, Gussie, would be to pursue more through a combination of things. Certainly undergraduate research that would generate more revenue for the school, but also combine that with opportunities for faculty exchanges. We did have one faculty member last year that spent about, I want to say 10 weeks, maybe 10, spent time over the summer in the Army's research lab doing research to allow him to kind of sharpen his skills of what's kind of going on in that particular space, but also to bring some of that back to the educational environment and also the internship offerings that we were able to do. But I think there's a lot more opportunity for us in that particular area for our cadets. And it's something that I think on the surveys, cadets indicated that they were very interested in.
Can I comment on this? Gusky, I'm glad you made that comment. I served on the academic subcommittee of the strategic plan working group, and we had a lot of discussion about undergraduate research that revolved around this. I mean, there is undergraduate research going on right now. No doubt about that. In fact, the faculty members on my group said, we really don't have capacity to do more at the moment. We've got more than we have cadets available to help us do the work. And so it is a challenge, according to the faculty both subgroup members of my subgroup, to expand undergraduate research. But I wonder if we don't reword this a bit to say, thus we need to determine if expansion of undergraduate research and into micro-credentialing makes sense. Because I do think you're right, Gussie, it's a little misleading to say we're not expansion into undergraduate research. We're doing it now.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be probably one additional area with undergraduate research that we think of it probably in the context of internships, but they are research internships. And so I think you think not only just on post to the summer undergraduate research initiative, but other cadets that have gone off and done internships in research. The Army Research Lab would be the most recent example of the addition to that program. So I think we're trying to capture both those elements, so there'll be opportunities to not only with what's available on post, but expansions even off post that looks and feels like an internship that's doing research component.
I think the other thing that I would just mention is, so the things that number one, we clearly have student undergraduate research. I mean, under the SURI program, we do research. We have students that come in over the summer and they participate in research efforts. A lot of those efforts as they exist right now are internally funded. They are done through Jackson Hope in how they are funded. The ones that I spoke to at the outset, for example, the partnership with the other senior military colleges and the DoD, they result in external funding coming to the research effort. The idea would be to take a look at where there might be opportunities for additional research that would bring external funding back to the Institute. And by doing that, then if the costing models are set up correctly, it could potentially generate additional revenues. And a lot of the thinking that we've talked about built around this is this idea of, again, if we agree that year over year increasing cost of undergraduate education is a challenge for us, then what are the additional ways that we might bring in revenue to the Institute?
Okay. Other comments on this one? The next one was suggestion to emphasize diverse people coming together as a strength, and the nuance of this comment was providing more emphasis on the cohesiveness of the group and not so much the focus on the individual. And that was sort of the gist of the comment. So you can see there in the red, further, the primary means of promoting inclusion and belonging will continue to achieve through learning experiences to promote effective teamwork, team cohesion, and leadership of teams, with an appreciation for diversity individual, and with an appreciation for diversity and individual effort. The strength of the VMI environment is a function of the character infused within individuals who are focused on achieving a common set of outcomes and results. So, pretty well encapsulates and address that comment well.
Well written.
The next suggestion, discuss enhancement of communications and marketing. This is under this foster esprit de corps. Nothing changed in the existing paragraphs. This was additional language added. Lastly, we will broaden VMI's value to the broader external community by enhancing strategic communications and marketing efforts in ways that help us communicate our uniqueness, continually make the VMI brand recognizably valuable to important leaders in state and federal agencies, and attract talented cadets, faculty, staff, and prominent organizations interested in hiring graduates. So I think that there's a lot of conversation on the value of the marketing effort, and I think that provides pretty good direction for on that. Okay. Next slide is focus on teams and team building rather than the individuals. This is somewhat related to the former comment 2 comments ago. It's under foster esprit de corps, and you can see that we added the addition there, and be productive members of a high performing core of cadets, getting back to the overall group teamwork element of it. Middle that the third paragraph, that is, cadets must earn their place within the corps. In return, we have a responsibility to ensure that the VMI system is conducive to healthy development and growth, and that every cadet, regardless of background, can be a contributing member throughout the echelons of the corps. And then you see the additional language that was added to the final paragraph, building and leading strong teams, diverse perspectives, challenging cadets to think critically and work collaboratively across differences. They'll also learn to work together effectively, build strong relationships, and hone their leadership and communication skills by fostering a sense of belonging and acceptance, while also embracing differences and unique perspectives. VMI will continue to produce continually competent leaders who can manage diverse teams, and make a positive impact on society. Any comments with that?
Questions from the
Very nice.
Yeah, nicely done. Yeah.
So this captures, there was some other.
Okay, Gussie, just anything from you?
Looks good.
Good. All right, great. Thanks. I'm sorry.
So there were some other non-substantive comments, editorial type corrections in their pieces, but I think this captures the main thrust of the comments we heard at the last brief. Sir, that's
Okay. All right, so the last slide just really talks about next steps, and just number one, I want to confirm with the XCOM and the members of the board that the intent is, while you all give your comments here, the intent would still be to go to the full board for a vote for an approval of the.
I look to see if others comfortable with that as a step. I think what we'd like to know is that all the executive committee members are comfortable with what's here, and then we will take the next step, as you said, bring it to the full board for a vote. But not a vote here per se, but it's just a level of comfort.
Sure.
Is everybody good with that? Gussie, how about yourself?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So,
Yes.
okay,
No,
good.
yes, I think tactically it would be a good idea to share the red lines and any adjustments from this meeting with the full board, so they can see where the changes were too.
Yep.
Do that. Good. And then the follow-on steps again would be to get the final publication of the plan after it's approved by the board. And then there's follow-on work and a considerable amount of follow-on work to begin to kind of set things in motion. But this also allows us, with a final strategic document, it allows us to begin to have conversations in sharing with the alumni agencies the approved strategy, so that they can begin the work that they need to in terms of understanding and articulating how it might impact the work that's going to be necessary to set up a campaign and or begin fundraising to generate the resources that would be necessary for implementation. And then our part would be the staff would begin to develop metrics and the assignment of metrics in those various different strategic areas to stakeholders. And those stakeholders, certainly I'm held accountable for the work done with the strategy as a whole, but the stakeholders are also held accountable by me on the things that need to get done.
Not to put you on the spot, sir, but when do you think the board would be able to see sort of that roadmap of deliverables and things?
So in May of 24, I think is, where I've described it. So, this coming May before the end of the academic year by that board meeting. And if it's in April, then we'll do it in April, at that board meeting, but we should have a set of metrics, that we can present to the board that coincide with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vision 2039 had a good one pager that was useful.
Sure.
If y'all can find a way to have a one pager, I think that'd be good. And also, I hope that y'all are giving particular thought around how to roll this out to alumni. There's good stuff here, and it needs to be communicated effectively.
Sure.
To that point, what's your thought, Cedric, on when it would go more broadly than just the board? I mean, we've got the board meeting coming up in a couple, 3 weeks, but then we have a meeting in January. Would it be sort of maybe after that January, or what?
It would be certainly after the January, and then, again, my thought would be that if there's any briefing or communication to alumni, friends of the Institute, that it would be at a high enough level where we're not kind of wading down into the very, very particulars. I think we can have the one pager certainly by then as a part of a brief so that people at least understand that, but to try not to avoid diving down too deep. But I think by, after that January board meeting, provided we get the approval, we would begin to kind of shape a briefing, a package, a presentation that would speak to that. There's some other things that I think we would anticipate doing, particularly when we start talking about things like facilities and infrastructure. Some of it Dallas and his team have already started to work on in terms of some conceptual drawings. But we'll have to get the team around and just figure out how much of that we're going to be able to get done as we start thinking about these things. We've already begun to develop a set of priorities for funding, and there's probably going to have to be some refinement work on that, but we've already got a good start on that as well.
I guess implicit in Teddy's comment is that we worked so hard to get to this document. We need to have actually as much energy applied to how we then roll it out. Right? It's because it's been an awful lot of work, but this is a momentous time.
Sure. And we'll have to. There's a marketing component to this that we're going to have to make sure we think through.
That's why I said maybe at the January meeting we can get a little glimpse into that. It makes sense.
Will this be posted on the Institute website or not?
Yeah, well, that's the intent. Yeah.
We've already started building that out. Like, it'll be more than just posting the plan. It'll be a whole.
Good.
We've talked about the alumni divide, and I know we have varying opinions on how big that is. But I think all alumni are going to be interested in what's our plan for the future, and are the things that make BMI unique and special intact. And we have a great opportunity to use this as a way of showing alumni things are intact. We're focused on the right things.
Okay, good. Well done.
All right.
Again, this format really helped accelerate the discussion. So we'll do the same with the full board with some of the adjustments that we just talked through.
Sure thing. Okay. The next topic is the transgender policy and procedures. Commandant is going to lead the discussion. I'm assuming we got him on the net. Before I turn it over to Bogey, I just want, number one, the shaping of this document has come through kind of a whole of institute approach, where we formed a committee that was led by the commandant and his staff, but it involved various different stakeholders across the whole institute to come up with this. And one key critical element of this and shaping this policy certainly is going to be the legal view, opinions that make sure are intentionally designed to make sure that we have an understanding of two things principally: what the law says and what might be risk exposure by the institute, given whatever decisions are made on how we shape this policy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Bogart. He can talk us through the products here. He's going to focus principally on the briefing that was prepared, but we included all the other documents so you all, as members of the executive committee, could have an opportunity to take a look at that and, if necessary, ask any questions. Bogey, you on the net?
I'm on the net, sir. Can you read me?
Yeah, got you.
Okay, good afternoon, all. Thank you for your time today. We're going to take you through a discussion on gender identity and accommodating transgender cadets, specifically how we adjusted 2 general orders, developed a policy on gender identity, and procedures related to accommodating transgender cadets. So before I get into the main portion of the brief, Mr. Watson, do you have any comments and any additional comments from the superintendent?
No, I think the best thing we can do is just plow right through it, Bogey, unless you feel differently, Cedric. I think you're right, though. The more we can understand where actually, frankly, policy is dictated to us by others, state and otherwise, versus where are we making some judgments. I think that's embedded in this discussion, as I recall.
Sure.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add is I will say that as I was getting briefed on this, it became very apparent to me that, number one, this is a very sensitive topic. And then number two, a lot of the things that will be built around a policy such as this is kind of like a moving target. And Pat has rightly coached us all that the legal framework and the legal decisions about this stuff are small at this particular juncture, but in all likelihood, over time will grow because there will be legal challenges, there will be suits and so on and so forth. And all of that will certainly build the body of work about reinforcing what the law says, what the policies say, where they're applicable, where they aren't applicable, and how we kind of build ourselves around an idea to minimize risk to the institute. And I think by risk, I'm talking about legal risk to the institute. So go ahead, Bogey.
All right, sir. Thank you. 2 considerations prompted a review of VMI policies and regulations relating to transgender cadets. The first was the Virginia Human Rights Act, which added gender identity to unlawful discrimination in the Commonwealth. And the second was the application of a transgender student last year, though they did not attend, but the decision was made to move forward to review our procedures. I'm calling your attention to, during our review, we looked at several references. They're here on the screen. The 2 I'll call out is, again, the Virginia Human Rights Act. And the second one not listed was the Virginia Department of Education 2023 Model Policies on Ensuring Privacy, Dignity, and Respect for All Students and Parents. Now, that's predominantly for K through 12, but there was a good framework in there to elaborate from when we looked at our standard operating procedures. As a prologue to all this, our review identified 3 areas which needed attention. There were 3 shortfalls. The first one was General Orders 13 and 16, the need to establish a policy on identifying a cadet's gender, and the third one were procedures for accommodating a transgender cadet. We assembled a community of practice, which consisted of 17 stakeholders, as delineated here on the community of practice slide. Input was received by all these organizations to refine what we came up with when we did our review. Let me go through the outcome. In your tab B, you'll see that's for GO 13. We simply added the term gender identity, and that's based on the Virginia Human Rights Act, which adds gender identity. In your tab C for General Order 16, again, that was modified to add gender identity. That's captured on the first page. The rest of the GO 16 we left in for your packet so you could see the rest of that general order. In tab D, the gender identity policy is in the form of a general order. The key language states, for the purposes of serving as a member of the VMI Corps cadets, a cadet's gender can be established by a government-issued identity document or by a personal statement of identity. This is based on Virginia Code, which talks about gender. Specifically, it talks about gender as being a word used in the masculine, includes the feminine or neuter. And then also another paragraph in Virginia Code, which talks about gender identity is a means an individual's internal sense of gender, which may be male, female, neither, or a combination of male and female, and which may be different from an individual's sex assigned at birth. This follows in suit with Section 1557 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which empowers the Office of Civil Rights at the federal level to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity. So the process that we used was, and I'll go through these documents, I'll have them on the subsequent slides here. But for General Order 13 and 16, we simply added gender identity. The transgender policy, I talked to you about the key language, we'll go to that. And then the operating procedures, I'll highlight some of the 8 areas that we looked at, which is based on the Virginia Department of Education's model that came through the governor's office. So we got initial guidance from the superintendent. We drafted, which you have in your packet, the GOs, the policy, and the SOP. Once these get approved, then the key is working out the details, which we'll find in an implementation working group, which we'll assemble here from the Institute to figure out any of the details that we need to. So let me go through the standard operating procedures for transgender cadets. Again, what to do was to develop the guidelines. The superintendent approved the guidelines, and that's approved what we are going to do based on BOV approval. And then once we get into the BOV approval, then we assemble the implementation working group that looks at those topic areas in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go through some of the documents. So first, we have a request for a motion. Sir, do you want to elaborate on this at all, or do you want me to carry it through?
Yeah, I'll just simply say that this, based on the last meeting where we discussed a motion that directed the Institute to simply come up with the policies and procedures. The desire of the board, as I understood it, was to bring forward the policies and procedures, to let the board weigh in, the board be able to approve those. So this motion is simply intended to say that I've looked at the procedures, the policy changes, and I have requested that the board approve them based on my approval of the staff work that's been done. So this does not in any way do anything other than to tee up the discussion and or approval by the board on the policy changes to 13 and 16 and the implementation of a new policy and then the standard operating procedures.
We talked about this at the last executive committee meeting, and we couldn't understand why we needed this then.
Yeah,
I still don't understand why this is necessary.
yeah. So I think
We can review anything we want to review.
I don't disagree. Don't disagree. But typically as we lead up to the various different board products that come to committees, they are usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are usually preceded by a document that I signed that said, hey, I've looked at this and I've approved it, and I'm presenting it to the board as a motion for their approval. Doesn't discount the ability of the board, now that we put before you the policy changes and the introduction of the new policy, and say, hey, change this, change that. It just says that as a superintendent, I've looked at this and I'm recommending that it move forward to the board for approval.
See,
which is different from before, because before we simply had the motion. We didn't have all the policies. We didn't have all the policies when we were putting it before you initially. We were putting something that said, give me direction to develop the policies. That was the difference.
why do you need a motion from us to give us your policy for approval?
Why? Again, I would say that very similar to the budget that gets put forward usually has on the front of it a cover that says that I've looked at the budget,
Yeah,
I've approved the budget,
right.
and then it's going before the board for your consideration for approval.
And you can do that with this without a motion from us. I just don't understand this.
I think the question would be, Cedric, can we actually just go through like we just did with the strategic plan, a discussion, get, some good back and
Absolutely.
forth that comes from that in terms of having gone through this. Ultimately, at the end of this, there'll be some feedback, I'm sure, in terms of things to adjust. From that will be something that you then will present to the board at the next meeting. So I think maybe we don't, maybe with this unique set of circumstances, we even need to do an emotion now, or what we still know full well, you're going to bring a motion to the board at a certain point.
And at this point, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, at this point, it's unsigned.
Yeah.
It's unsigned.
So
So
I think-
again, this is not intended to do anything but other than follow the former procedures of what we do ordinarily with many of the things that work their way through the staff to the committee to the board for approval.
I think where maybe it feels a little uncomfortable to some is we're doing a motion before we've even had a discussion a little bit. Maybe that's what, maybe
We're
that.
not
Go ahead.
doing a motion now. You're just
Correct.
showing.
Just-
Right, that's what I thought. It comes across. Yeah,
This will be part of the package.
Right,
The DOD, according to our bylaws, are required to approve
Right.
ultimately
absolutely.
Yes.
all of GOs and policies.
So there's really no decision at this particular moment for us at all as an executive.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Discussion.
that's perfect. Let's go to the discussion. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, let me continue through. Here's GO 13. That's the simple ad for GO 13 highlighted. GO 16, similar highlight. This complies with Virginia code. This is the policy on cadet gender identity. The key piece here is highlighted in paragraph 4. Now we did, just as back up to the executive committee, we did go through DOD's instruction for contracted ROTC cadets, which is spelled out in the instruction. So at that point, that takes over onto the federal side. We're basing our documents here predominantly on Commonwealth Code. And again, if you look at this bottom piece, for the purposes of serving as a member of the VMI Corps cadets, a cadet's gender can be established by a government-issued identity document or a personal statement of gender identity. I'm going to continue on.
Hold on, Bogey.
Well, on that one, which governs? I mean, if the personal statement conflicts with the government issued identity card, I guess the personal statement governs.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, it says or, so it can be either or. Okay, but ultimately, the personal statement by law has to govern.
Right.
Okay.
By what law?
Well, this is what we just seen here.
It's
I don't see-
Yeah, it's Virginia Code 38.23449. It says gender identity means an individual's internal sense of gender.
That means we're required to accept that for the purposes of being a member of the Corps,
That's what this policy says, yes.
but that's not what the law says.
The law says internal sense.
So Pat, can you elaborate on what,
So from a federal standpoint, the overriding law or authority is Title IX, which says that gender identity is a protected class, that you cannot discriminate against somebody on the basis of gender identity because it's akin to being discriminated against on the basis of sex. The law is very vague and unsettled about how one legally establishes their gender identity. Not a lot of authority out there. Now, I understand the DMV, you can just roll into the DMV and indicate that you want to change your gender marker, which is the data on your driver's license that indicates your sex. And basically, it's just your statement, and you make the statement to the DMV, and your sex is changed on your driver's license, your gender marker is changed. So, based on all the guidance that we have out there, and there's not a lot, a simple statement by an individual indicating their gender identity is something different than their biological sex is sufficient.
And this is consistent with state guidelines.
Yes, sir.
Is it
And
consistent? Sorry.
with state model policies.
Now, the model policies apply to K through 12, so they're guidance documents. They don't apply to higher ed. Title IX.
But it includes allowances for an 18-year-old, somebody over 18 in that.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But Title IX, compliance with Title IX dictates that we cannot discriminate on the basis of gender identity.
And so what is the state saying on this?
The Human Rights Act just basically says gender identity as well. You cannot discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So let me just say, if our policy decides to impose additional requirements on people to establish their gender identity, then I think that we could have some exposure with regard to Title IX to the extent that we're imposing something above and beyond the requirements of the law.
And who have you talked to about that in the state?
Who have I talked to about this?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Attorney General's office. Just based on my own research. I actually had a conversation with a federal judge a few minutes before this meeting. I confirmed the state of the law on that.
And it's pretty clear right now that the law is unclear on all this, correct? And working its way through the courts and likely to be at the Supreme Court within, say, 3 years.
I would guess how long would it take the Supreme Court?
But it's headed there.
What is headed there?
Rules around this, laws
In
around.
other words, how
around-
one establishes their gender identity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there existing suits? Because, I mean, that would be the thing that would.
I'm not aware of any existing suits right now.
Okay, or existing challenges, maybe that's the more appropriate term, that would work their way through state court appeals.
Are there cases working
Yeah,
through the
cases.
system that would have bearing on this, give us more guidance?
I'm not aware of any now, but again, there's no published opinions on the matter, so we don't really have a lot to go on at this point.
Other than state guidance,
Right.
State, federal, state, federal.
What is the, Colonel Bogart, you said you looked at the DoD policy. What is the Army doing?
So the Department of Defense has a policy that states that it's based on the gender marker. So let me do this for everybody's review. Here's some of the definitions that we looked at, and this is based on Department of Defense as well as some other state definitions. So just use that as a reference. What the Department of Defense stated was, if it is of medical necessity for an individual to transition from one sex to another, validated by a DoD doctor, then the gender marker, which is the male, female, or neutral on their military identification, could be changed. There's a process in Virginia where a medical doctor could do the same and provide that documentation to the individual, brings it down to the Department of Motor Vehicles, for example, to change their driver's license, or they can have their birth certificate. So for the Department of Defense, the process is of medical necessity to change, and then they change the gender marker, which is the gender ID on the identification. And for the state, it's a application on the one of the forms, state forms that you could bring to DMV or change your birth certificate.
So is my understanding correct that a person in Virginia could get their license changed to match their internal gender identity if it were different from their gender identity at birth? go
That's-
through VMI as their identified gender and then join the military and have to revert to their biological gender?
Well, they can so it basically is they could come to VMI and establish their gender identity through a government provided identification or a statement. But if they went to join the military, then they would have to have a military medical review.
So there's a little bit of a divergence between these proposed requirements and what the military requires. There's like an additional step.
Well, the military has its own, but this which would be a separate step that the cadet would have to follow. So it would be medical screening at that point.
And
We're not-
somehow that's acceptable in the law.
And we're not requiring in this policy draft medical screening.
Have we talked to ROTC about this, or does I don't?
Well, the Department of Defense instruction was pretty clear.
I mean, I guess VMI is ROTC, like how it would be, or is that sort of later?
No, the law itself or the DoD instruction itself says that it applies to all ROTC students that are contracted.
Do they have to get the medical exam prior to, like if they had a 4-year scholarship or something?
Correct.
Is there some level of consistency with the other 15 state colleges and universities? Has the governor's office issued a statement as to what the transgender policy should be at UVA, Virginia Tech, and all the rest?
No, and I can tell you it's because EMI is fairly unique, because of our living arrangement with Paris. At other schools, to be frank, it doesn't seem to be much of an issue. People go to class, people live in the dorms.
So
For example, Pat, if UVA had a transgender student and they obviously have dormitories on campus, right? And if through a dormitory arrangement, they could not accommodate a student, then they are left with other options like getting some type of off-campus housing, making other choices on who they would live with.
I believe that's correct. I believe that's right, because there's so many different options.
Sure.
Where
Sure.
EMI doesn't have that.
Sure. I think the other thing, and this is a question, with regard to any public college, clearly K through 12 is what the model policies address.
Which is the only thing we've got.
Coming from the state, yes, absolutely. Are you aware of any policies that have come out from the administration that speak directly to higher ed?
No, sir.
I think and to contrast the model policies with the overriding law as it exists right now, as I understand it, one of the big differences is that the model policies for K through 12 speak to these decisions, number one, being made through parents, and number two, as they're written, they define the biological sex as the driver to make the determination on how sexual orientation is identified. And I may not be getting words exactly right, but in those model policies, there is that statement that says, except to the extent federal law may require otherwise. And so, that's kind of what has led the work to say, hey, we're going to try to model our policies based on federal law as we present it to the board.
And if federal law was clear on that, then that model policy wouldn't exist, or it'd be different.
Probably so.
And just to clarify, parental consent is required unless in that document, unless someone is 18.
Well, it says K through 12. I don't know that it puts
It defines
an age.
eligible person
Okay.
as somebody 18
Sure.
or over.
Okay.
does not need parental consent. They
Okay.
can sign for themselves.
Correct.
They can, yeah.
Correct.
Did
Which
we,
I think is important because there's not much difference between an 18-year-old in high school and an 18-year-old in college.
I would agree, based on the day-to-day interactions with a lot of them.
did we ask the other senior military colleges whether they have policies?
We did. The Citadel has both this, I talked to Citadel and Norwich. They both have between 3 to 5 open transgender cadets. At Norwich, they afford them housing off of the barracks complex because they are a university and do have a civilian population to it. Same with Norwich or with Citadel. Citadel's policy is reasonable accommodation, which is similar to the tack that we're taking. And they reasonably accommodate cadets' requests on the transgender piece. Let me go back up to, I can continue on with reviewing the standard operating procedures if we would prefer.
Yeah, go ahead, Bogey.
All right, so if you look at the preamble, what we're talking about here is affording the latitude for institute and cadet leadership to work this on a case-by-case basis. So when you look at Norwich and the Citadel, their total population, let's just round it up to 4,000, and you're talking upwards of maybe 10 cadets. So it's really a case-by-case basis. These are the procedures, not the policy. These are just the standard operating procedures, and they're designed as general guidelines. Now, if we ever get to the point of implementation, then an implementation working group will stand up to manage the details. So I really do want to make that clear, because what we did here was we took the 8 topic areas that were in the model guidelines from the state and elaborated it out towards VMI. I'll go through those now. You can see in A, maintenance of a safe and supporting learning environment free from discrimination and harassment for all cadets. You can see the 3 bullets there. I think the piece that I want to highlight here is for medical care, it's the same thing that we have for any cadet. If there's
Hold on. Colonel Bogart, can you go back to the page before and talk to 3?
Okay, so what we did here was transgender cadets are subject to the same standards, requirements, regulations, or policies as other cadets. I think that's a prevalent line right there. And that means service in the VMI Corps is dependent on whether individual identifies as a man or a woman. Now, we left it that way because our facilities are male or female at this point. We do have some facilities that can be gender neutral, if you want to use that term, sort of the bathrooms specifically. But as we go into some of the details, we'll talk about housing and shower facilities.
So on this, whether the individual identifies as a man or a woman, is that consistent with the state's model policies?
Let me look at this.
I'll answer it. The answer is no.
In what respect, Ted?
That the person gets to choose.
So, Bogey, you correct me, or Pat, correct me if I'm wrong. The individual, based on federal law, does get to choose. However, what we've incorporated into the SOP is a piece that says that for rooming arrangements and the impact that it might have on other cadets, they certainly have the ability to identify that based on their religious belief, based on their philosophical beliefs, they don't want to be a part of the rooming arrangement. They don't feel comfortable with them being in a room, so on and so on. So I don't know if that's specifically to your question.
Well,
tell me if I'm
it's
wrong.
not consistent with the model policy.
Okay.
It says it's biological sex.
But isn't the model policy K through 12?
It is, but it's all we have.
Well,
if you're over 18, the law changes. 'Cause
No.
you get to, well,
Not in the model policy. If you're an 18-year-old and you're
if you're
a
18,
senior in high school,
but you're not
it
in
still
high school, you're in
applies.
college, so now that's my point.
It's all we had to go on, and your prologue says that this policy and procedure is based on this model policy.
Unless federal law says
Unless-
otherwise.
Correct.
And federal law,
document, but it's not authoritative. To the
the
extent.
federal law is unclear on this. Is that true?
Federal law says you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity.
Federal law says you can't discriminate on the basis of pregnancy either. Right?
That's
We don't
right.
allow pregnant cadets in the Corps.
We do allow, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, we have allowed pregnant cadets in the Corps up to a specific term
Okay.
based
We're
on their ability to
discriminating after
perform.
a certain point.
Well, no, so what
And
they,
we're also saying that you can't discriminate based on disability.
well, what they have, so if, to your
Okay.
point about the example about pregnancy. If a cadet were determined to be pregnant, they remain in the Corps up until a point where they can no longer perform the duties of a cadet in the Corps, and then they would be furloughed up until a point, and then they would have to have a family care arrangement, because we do have a policy that clearly says that for cadets to reside in the barracks, they have to be, they reside in the barracks in effect as a single, unwedded, unparented individual.
My point is,
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a draft policy that's being put forward right now. Teddy, I understand, it sounds like you have some specific concerns with the implementation or the wording of the policy. If there are some specific legal questions that you want me to go back and do some more research and do some checking on, I can do that. I can report back to the executive committee. But that's based on, our understanding today of what the law is.
okay, so yeah, I have some real concerns with this.
Would you like to maybe offline? We can talk about it. We can tell me
No.
exactly which one we go back and look at.
I can tell you right, I can tell everyone on the record
Okay.
that I've got real concerns with this for a lot of reasons. But let's just start with state guidance here. General, I know you and Tom talked with the governor about this back in May, right around the time of graduation, when he was up at BMI.
Sure.
And you told him that our policy would be based on biological sex.
Mhm.
So this is different. This is counter to that. The state, you say that the policy is based on these model policies. And you're saying that you've adjusted from that because of federal law. The federal law is not clear on all this. And just because gender identity has been inserted into the statement does not mean that we don't have some flexibility here. Pregnancy, marital status, disabilities are all also in those same documents. Yet we have minimum physical and mental standards that you have to meet to come to BMI. We have a policy not allowing married students. We have a policy around pregnancy. You can argue whether it covers all 9 months or not. Fact is, we have a policy there. So just because it's added into federal statement that gender identity is another factor doesn't mean that we have to implement what y'all are talking about implementing. And to say that we're required by law to do it is not accurate. Now, the other thing, Pat, if you want to talk offline, is have you talked, you haven't talked to anybody else in the Attorney General's office for guidance on this. I know that the Attorney General's office has recognized expert in this area, and Andrew Ferguson, the Solicitor General. You haven't talked to him about this. I am assuming no one's talked to the Secretary of Education about this. I'm assuming we're flying on our own on this, and we're making certain assumptions about federal law, where the state has given guidelines, admittedly for K through 12, but it's the only guidelines we've got that are completely inconsistent with this.
Can I ask this, try to drill down on what you're saying, all well said, Eddie, coaching. We have to do this post haste because next year we may have a transgender student applying. We have to have a policy in place for where they fill it and how they work in the court or move out of the court. It sounds to me, and I think that a lot of this work that's presented here is excellent in terms of the policies, the appeal procedures, the discrimination, how we're going to go about the operational aspects of this. The key issue for you, it sounds like, is the definition of gender identity, because all of the rest of it falls into place, it seems. And we need to drill down, according to you, I think, on, and I hear what you're saying, on where's the intersection between the law and what we do at BMI that may be different from the law, or the law may be undefined about how a cadet gets to or should create that gender identity. Is that the key issue? Because the rest of it kind of falls into place.
Yeah,
So that if it's
the state says, in the only guidelines we've got, the biological sex is the determination. And
so your default for us to consider is keep out all the procedures and policies in place, but tell an applicant that your gender identity is going to be biological sex, period.
And based
And that's
on
it.
government ID. And if a medical doctor has checked off that somebody has transitioned to the opposite sex, fine, we'll accept that. But otherwise, we should be following the guidance from the state on this, and we should be doing what's right for the Corps. And I think there's a whole host of reasons why this is bad for the Corps. It hurts unity. It creates all kinds of problems. It puts a burden on proving you're not discriminating. It's just on and on, all kinds of problems associated with this.
So that's the key issue that you would like us to focus on is how you select gender identity.
We should certainly start there. If we do that and determine we're going to go by biological sex, unless someone has completed their transition, as we talked back in the spring about this. Yeah.
So, Pat, number one, we can check all the details and the traps and do that, and we need to do that before we come to finalization on any policy that's going to get approved. And so this is good discussion and good coaching. Pat, could you talk about, because again, ultimately, at least from my perspective, this comes down to exposure of risk, right? This comes down to exposure of risk, legal risk. So Pat, as we think about a policy and what the law says versus what the guidelines say, if we put into policy something that is inconsistent with the law as it exists right now, I'd like you to speak to, number one, the individual that gets accepted to VMI, right? Do we have the ability to say, number one, our policy, we have a policy that says you will be treated based on your biological sex. And then if the student, that student who has been appointed and or accepted into VMI says, well, I am a trans whatever, I would like to be treated by my gender identity, my gender marker. Do we as an institute, or what level of risk exposure do we have if we then say, well, based on that, our policy and your incompatibility or your willingness to be compatible with our policy, we won't allow you in the VMI. What's our risk exposure?
Tremendous, will be a test case.
Okay.
Wait a minute, the end of that was, we won't allow you into BMI?
Well, so again, based on policy, because again, my question to him was, does the prospective cadet have the ability to say, I'm coming into VMI, and I'm a trans male or trans female, and I would like to be treated as a trans male or trans female, and then, which would be inconsistent with our policy. Then what's our risk exposure? If we then were to say, well, unless you conform to our policy, then we can't let you in. Okay, so I'm just asking a question about our risk exposure.
You decide, you're based on the policy.
Here's my only question. If you have an administrative change and they go redo this policy, that's it, which can happen.
So
The existing policy right now, K through 12, if it gets rewritten with the new administration, are we constantly gonna have to evolve this definition? Is my question, in the absence of a Supreme Court case. So I think for me, irrespective of the definition, I think we need to understand the risk under federal law, what we have, and make a decision. I'll entertain anything. I just gotta understand, like, if that policy changes in 2 years, does that mean we have exposure because we didn't let someone in because the policy was wrong? Okay, versus law. So for me, this becomes more of understanding the risk, understanding the cost associated with that risk. If we want to be a litmus test, fine. Well, let's go in with our eyes open and understand the issue, which I think goes back to Pat. Because I'm like you, it seems to me the drill down issue is, how do you identify yourself and who gets to make that decision? Is it the policy? Is it the person, and which one we're picking? And if we're gonna pick one, whichever one it is, I just want to understand what it can cost us.
Yeah,
That's it.
I agree with you, Conrad. The legal risk is certainly one factor, as is state guidance, as is what's best for the court.
Correct. And we factor all those in
Right.
and we make a decision.
Right.
I
And I think
agree.
we gotta have an answer.
Can I throw out that I don't take too much stock in the K through 12 policy? I understand it's the only one we have, but I mean, there's a very clear difference between K through 12 and college. I mean, once you turn 18, you're an adult, you're on your own, you can join the military, what have you. So I understand if it provided any useful guidance, but I don't know that it does.
Well,
I also want to throw out here, I agree with Teddy on number 3. It feels to me like what we're saying is that service in the VMI Corps of Cadets is not dependent on whether the individual identifies as a man or woman. I understand there's rooming and showering and things like that are dependent on one's biological sex or one's gender, but I guess maybe it just needs to be reworded a little bit.
The first sentence in paragraph 3, Gussie?
Right.
Okay, all right. We'll circle back and just kind of maybe have a conversation with you on kind of what wording you think is appropriate.
we've talked about trying to understand the risk here, right? I have to say, I'm disappointed that y'all brought this forward without more clarity around that risk. That you haven't talked to experts available to us that have spent a lot of time already on these issues.
This is weird area of the law.
We're making a big assumption that we have to do this, and that's just not right.
We're making the assumption that we have to follow the law. We are
In
not
our
making.
interpretation of the law without talking to our experts.
I don't disagree. We can do that work, but I'm saying the basis of all the work that has gone into this was to frame a policy that was consistent with the law. I think to the point that Conrad made, if we go back and we do the due diligence to say, hey, you know, there's so much gray area in here that we can say it's based on biological sex, and we understand the risks that go forward with that, then we can change the policy if that's the policy that is going to be acceptable to the board. But again, as we framed it, as we looked at it, as we discussed with members of the core, and I disagree that going by gender identity would be disruptive to the core, because the ones that participated in the work that was done didn't signal that. But if we were to do that, and there's an understanding that, again, you have a certain amount of exposure, and we are willing to accept that as an institute, then we can modify it however the board sees fit. But the going in position and how we started this, the going in position was to make sure that we understood based on existing law. And so my understanding is we know what the model policies are. We're versed in that. There's been research in that. We also know what, at least according to legal counsel, what the overriding law is, which is largely based on or centered around Title IX. But again, we can go back and do more homework, and we can go back in and lay out a case. But I think fundamentally what it's going to end up being is a discussion on how much risk exposure is the institute willing to accept.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the amount of research we've done on the legality here is shockingly little.
Well, I've done a significant amount of research today. I've read.
But you have to talk to people in your office that know more about this than you do.
Well, to the extent it seems like you would like me to do that, and to the extent this is a draft policy, I can certainly go, but I want to make sure I understand the salient legal question that you want to put forth and see if I can get an answer to that. And it seems to me that you're a proponent of having a policy that would indicate that regardless of a person's choice regarding their gender identity, that BMI is going to use your biological sex as your gender identity for purposes of our policy. Is that correct?
That's the start. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not the end of it, but that's certainly the start.
Okay. And basically, if we do that, what is our risk from a legal perspective? Is that the answer? Is that the question you'd like answered?
That's one of the questions, Pat.
Okay.
You know, how can we say we have to do this, but somehow it's okay to not allow married?
Well, if you remember, I gave a presentation, I believe was it any meeting or meeting about the legality of marriage and pregnancy policy.
Right.
And I can tell you sitting here today that those policies do not fly in the face of any federal law or any federal guidance or any case law. I can tell you that a policy where we're telling an individual that comes in the door at BMI that your biological sex, we don't care what your gender identity is, your gender identity is what we're going to tell you because it's your biological sex and you have a problem with it. So,
all right.
I think we're going to have some issues.
How about you can tell us who you want to room with, and you can tell us which bathroom you want to use.
Well,
it's the same. You're
well, again, the policy though, to that point, the policy does describe in here the ability of the other cadets that might be in that rooming arrangement to say whether they accept that or not. And for whatever reason, if it's a religious belief, it's a personal belief, whatever the case. So we do say that in this policy as it's drafted.
Yeah, you allow people to opt out.
Sure.
That's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing as what?
As a policy on where person is gonna shower and who they're gonna room with.
Well, and so the working group, the follow-on work that the commandant talked about, would be to go and do an assessment throughout the post and the barracks, to look at the existing facilities, some of which do or would accommodate a gender neutral arrangement when it comes to birthing and bathing and so on and so forth to do that. So that
Yeah,
work, because it's a test case.
And the
We
30
have no
women
test
in the
case.
class that didn't want, to take a shower with a person
Sure.
with a penis
Sure.
has to go, they have to wait in line somewhere else. That's what this policy says.
No. What it says is that we would have a showering facility that, and we do have this, that
Single
would
use.
accommodate with a single use,
Yeah,
correct?
so the 30 of them would have to wait in line.
The trans cadet would have the ability to go and use that facility vice a facility that's designated for a male or a female specific.
That's not what.
Am I
this
correct
says.
or am I correct? on
No,
that,
this
Logan?
says that if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else.
Where's that at?
Well, first off, these are procedures and not policy. So we can
Yeah.
go down to,
You are,
I'll show you.
it's right there.
Page 3F4.
Single-use bathrooms and facilities are available in accessible areas and provided with appropriate signage indicating accessibility for all cadets. These facilities are available to any cadet who does not feel comfortable in the presence of individuals with features associated with the opposite biological sex.
Right, so you're gonna have 20 or 30 women waiting in line for a single-use
We
shower.
don't have that, but the numbers make it to that, but I don't think you have that issue right now. We don't have any, we may have one. I mean, if we get to the point where we have 20 transgender,
That's not what this is saying here.
well, but
This is saying if there's one in the shower and 20 women are uncomfortable with that, they have to go waiting in line for a single-use facility.
so.
I don't think we ought to get in the mired in the bog here,
Sure.
but that's just an example of the kind of disruption to the core that this policy is creating.
Well,
And
this is not a policy, it's Mr. Gottwald, it's a procedure. So we
Excuse
have an
me.
implemental working group that will go through all these details. And again, this is a case-by-case instant. I will tell you that if we have one transgender cadet, which we did as a prospect this last year, there was no disruption. But you bring up some good points. And I think what you highlighted to Pat already is what's our starting point, and then we can go for there. All these things are debatable, but that's what the implementation working group is for.
I agree. I agree, and if we could back up a little bit, I don't think we need to get too far in the weeds here, about how the biological marker or how the gender is determined. So we've got in this draft policy, a statement from the individual can suffice. It sounds like from DOD, there's a more stringent medical requirement. And then I'm wondering if there's a middle ground where it could be, something like, an accommodation, like if you have something from a doctor saying this person has, a different gender identity than their biological sex. And I'm wondering if we can get Pat to sort of run those down and see where we are on exposure and where we are with regard to consistency with other colleges, and where we are maybe with, the Attorney General, what their stance is on it, and just see, what the different options are. I'm interested in. Because we've got the military component, if we let somebody, go through based on their, just a statement about their gender identity, then what if they, run into problems when they want to go to the military? I just feel like we need to think through the whole process.
Right, but I will say that DOD does not have to comply with Title IX. So,
good point.
Okay.
You're saying that the military has exposure under Title IX with its current policy?
no, the military does not have to comply with Title IX, neither.
And the military doesn't have to comply with Title. Okay, I understand.
Right. So looking to the military, to implement the military standards at VMI as much as we might like to do it, we can't because we have to comply with Title IX.
well, I think that before we have a policy and before we have procedures, pardon me for confusing the two, we ought to get guidance from the state. We ought to answer the question, what does the state want? And
Well, to
also,
that point, I'm sorry. to
also-
interrupt you. Conrad says that can change administration to administration.
which is why we should also get guidance from the state on what the law says.
That's good. I'm gonna be once again accused of short-changing a conversation. I think we've had a healthy debate here and discussion. Cedric, if it's okay with you, I think what it is, we obviously got some more work to do. Some avenues where I think there's been appropriately some issues raised, some of them legal, some of them practical, and let's kind of have a process in place to run those down. So again, I know I'll be accused of stifling a discussion. I apologize for that, but I think we understand there's a lot still to be figured out.
Sure.
And I think your reference to the word risk, Teddy's discussion about what's the triggering event, is it biological, is it a statement, is it a doctor's certificate? There's a whole series of really complex issues here.
Mhm.
And it seems to me we can get more, there's more we can do to track
Sure.
those down as it relates to risk. The other is, what's the alternatives? I mean, no one ever likes to make a decision with one alternative. What are the other alternatives? Fulfilling both Title IX and state and federal law, but also respecting the core. And the core is, we got to continue to be sure that's the right thing for the core as well. And even questions of deferral. I mean, there's some things learned from other programs that I think we could throw into the mix here too. So if everyone's comfortable, I'm absolutely not trying to stifle the discussion, but I also think, frankly, there's work to be done. And maybe if people will reach out to either you or Pat or both with specific questions, maybe come up as we sort of more digest the discussion we've had this morning. Is that good? Again, I'm not trying to stifle conversation, but we had a couple other things we need to get to. This is an incredibly challenging one.
Absolutely.
From all avenues.
We'll take that on.
And I think, Teddy, you're right, to be sure we run it up the right, right channels up within the state. Getting in intelligence is a very important part to that.
Can I just throw in that I actually think this is really amazing. You guys have done a lot of work in this incredibly complicated issue, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I agree. I just want to ask or raise one more issue associated with this, and this is on page 4 of the SOPs. Inclusion and conscience. It says BMI is committed to an educational and work environment that is inclusive of all individuals, regardless. And it lists a lot of things, including pregnancy and disability. Why is that in the transgender SOP? And are these next?
In the SOP. Let's see. Bogey, can you
Yeah, I can elaborate on that. What we decided to do was lift that from another part and place it in here just for clarification. Again, it can be removed when we do the editing, but it was just to add clarification that the transgender piece also falls in suit with these other accommodations.
So this lift, Bogey, does it or does it not come from another policy that exists talking about not discriminating?
It comes from a series of policies, sir. We just combined it into one.
What page is it on where it talks about pregnancy?
It's on page 4. It's on the screen, sir. It's on the screen.
Okay, so that comes from a lift. But we also have corresponding policies that, for example, talk about the ability or inability to operate and live within the barracks. So there is no intent. There is no intent that there's a what next, right? There is no intent to do that.
And the beginning of that statement says educational and work environment. So
And not
when
or.
you're talking about pregnancy and disability, you're also talking about faculty and staff.
Workforce.
And not or.
Educational or work environment. Is that what you're saying?
Bill's saying it applies to the work environment too, which is fine, but
Yeah.
this says education.
Right. Okay. So you're saying,
I just wonder if you're including it here, or you're saying, next, we're gonna address,
yeah,
pregnancy and disability.
there's no intent. There's no intent to do that for the Corps cadets.
We have
So we
latitude
got
there,
some-
we should have latitude here as well, but let's get more input.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right,
All right, next topic is, thanks, Bogey, thanks, Pat. The next topic, and I'm gonna go through this very quickly because we aren't at a point where we want to brief the board on any decision that's been made. But it's about the athletic budget, and just to update you, there have been a series of meetings that have occurred. There's been some work done to begin to kind of unpack the budget challenges for the athletic department. And that work has allowed us to kind of better understand as we move forward how long those challenges will persist. It's caused us to have discussions and meetings with the alumni agencies and to begin to look internally to come up with some solutions that would get the athletic budget in alignment for where they are funded presently. And there's about 5, 6, 7 recommendations that are pending with a little bit more additional analysis that's ongoing that will be brought before me. Right now, it's a combination of discussions between Dallas Clark and his team and the athletic department, and in some cases, the KeyDet Club to just kind of bring to light what these recommendations are. And so that work is going to be done. What I will tell you is that based on what I've seen, the preliminary work so far, some combination of these recommendations, either in total or in part, if we implement them, it just needs to be made clear that it solves the budget to, again, have our athletic department and our athletic funding at the lowest in the conference, So again, I go back to what kind of experience do we want our core cadet student athletes to have when it comes to the experience of being a Division I athlete? Do we want them to compete to win in the endeavors that they do, similar to what we do with our club sports and our club programs, where we fund them at a level that allows them to compete against comparable colleges in those endeavors? So more to follow on that, but I just wanted to hit a highlight on that so folks know, and subject to anybody's questions about it, I can talk real quick or just highlight some of the recommendations if you want. But again, there's ongoing work still with these budget recommendations for the athletic department. And I would anticipate that we will have some decisions to put forward that I will have made by the January board meeting.
maybe just the glimpse into the overall view of what's coming towards us. Is it more budget tightening stuff, or is it strategic actually in terms of where we think we can play? No pun intended, where we can play and not play.
Yeah, so it is more budget tightening. A strategic look at our athletic programs right now is not on the table based on the shortfall. A strategic look might be on the table as we begin to think about whether and what it would take to get our level of funding out of ninth place, certainly in the Southern Conference, and then fairly low in other conferences, and then to get us at a better competitive stance based on having funding that would put us at a higher level.
Any questions, comments at all? I mean, it's more to come, but good to see it's on the very top of the agenda for you, your team. Inviter, are there any other topics for the open session? Otherwise, I think I'll move us into closed session.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Hopefully quick. We had asked for the training schedule for the DOI training for the cadets.
Mm-hmm.
So the board could attend some of those sessions,
Okay,
and we haven't gotten that.
okay.
The other thing is, do you have an update on what's happening with the boxing club?
The Bogey, you want to give an update on boxing? I know what you briefed me on, but just, I mean, it's been at least a week since you and I talked about that. So where are we on solidifying either a contract or an agreement with a coach?
So we have a coach identified out of Naval ROTC, and that individual is now going through the training certification that the USIBA requires. In the meantime, we're trying to assemble the cadets themselves so that they can start doing non-boxing related training. More to follow, sir, but that's it where I got it right now.
But how long is that certification expected to take?
You know, I would think it's only going to be about 2 weeks. He has to take a series of tests.
So as of now, they still are not allowed to in the gym, basically.
Yeah, they have to have a supervised coach. And as soon as we finish signing up this individual with the paperwork and getting the certification done. But my intent is to get him to start training as soon as I can. So I'll have more for you this week.
Thank you.
Anything else? I'm gonna take the steps to move us into closed session, and maybe we'll pick up lunch and then we'll
Sure.
dive into closed session, if that's okay. So at this time, which is 1:26, I entertain a motion that the board go into a closed session to discuss: one, matters related to the employment, assignment, appointment, or performance of specific public officers, appointees, or employees, and the evaluation of performance of departments or schools of the public institutions of higher education pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711 A1, relating to the superintendent's performance review and of special staff and the evaluation of specific departmental operations. Secondly, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711 A7, pertaining to actual or probable litigation of the institute. And thirdly, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711 A8. And again, I'd ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Anyone, all the A's say A.
Aye.
Any declines? Good. We're now in closed session. Let's pause just for a second to, I think, Bill,
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay,
So we're back on the live stream?
we're back.
Okay, the closed session is ended and the board is now in open session. It's 3:09. During its closed meeting, the board discussed only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only those public business matters identified in the motion convening the board in closed session. I'm going to ask for a motion to certify the closed meeting.
So moved.
There's a second?
Second.
I think we need a roll call. Billy, want to do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Fain. Aye. Mr. Gottwald.
Aye.
Ms. Lord.
Aye.
Mr. Watson.
Aye.
And I've spoken to Mr. Garcia. We'll follow up with an email asking him to certify.
Well, again, thank you all. I know we took an awful lot of time. We've gone longer than we really intended to, but for good reason. We've covered an awful lot of topics, and thank you all. And this will close the session unless there's any further comments from anyone. A motion to close? Second?
Second.
Any opposed? Or we're closed then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.